Now, when he goes on, he gives some variations that are very interesting. But this is absolutely part of the Ethiopic and of the manuscripts of the Ascension of Isaiah.
So he's talking about the pocket gospel being part of those particular manuscripts.
Yeah. He implies there's no variation in the Ethiopic. I'm pretty sure there's disagreements among the manuscripts of the Ethiopic, but I think he's just garblingly. What he means to say is that all the Ethiopic manuscripts contain the pocket gospel. I think that's what he means. Not that all the Ethiopic manuscripts agree completely in every detail.
Right.
So I assume he's just kind of fumbled the way he said that. But anyway, let's keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I was taking it as him just talking about the pocket gospel in general, not like a broad brush statement about.
Yeah, right. Again, I'm interpreting his words charitably, but like taken literally, what he's saying is false. But taking it charitably, that he's just describing a fact, which is all the Ethiopic manuscripts are part of the tradition that has the pocket gospel, so that's why they all have it. Right. It's the fact that the completely separate tradition, the Slavonic and Latin traditions, don't have it, and he's going to get into that. So.
This is absolutely in there. There's no variation in the Ethiopic. It's all there, okay? Now, when you go to that one tradition in the Slavonic and the Latin version, there's a shortening of this text, okay? And one of the reasons that it's been shortened is it's because there's things later in this little vignette that were later taken not to be orthodox. And so this section was shortened. Now, some would claim that this section was chopped off, but no, it's not completely chopped off. It's still clear that Mary, the Virgin of the line of David, had a baby named Jesus, okay, even in the shortened version. Okay, so that doesn't go away somehow, okay? It's just been shortened.
That is 100% false. And I was trying to think, like, how he's talking like he knows what he's talking about, right? Like he's talking like he checked, right? That's what it sounds like. Like any audience member would think, oh, he looked and confirmed all of this. But I'm trying to reconstruct, it's like, this is completely false. So like, how did he even come to think these things, right? And so it's got to be another telephone game where he's getting this through multiple layers of apologetics on Reddit or something. I don't know where he's getting it from, but this is a garbling of facts. In so many ways, it's hard to untangle. But first of all, quite simply, in the Slavonic and Latin, absolutely, it is not the case that it is just shortened. It is completely deleted. And in its place is one sentence, right? So one sentence that's not in it, taking it away and replacing it with a completely different single sentence is not shortening it. Right. So that's I can't understand how he would think that that's the way to describe it. But also there's no mention in the Slavonic or Latin of Mary or the Virgin or David or any of that, or a baby. Like none of that is in there at all. None. Zero. Now, so I'm thinking, like, why does he think this? And so the best I can come up with is that because he hasn't read Norelli, even though he claims to, he thinks Norelli argued, because this gets said on the internet a lot and it's also false. He thinks Norelli argued that the martyrdom and the ascension are a unity, that they were all written together at the same time. That's not true, because Norelli argued that the Ascension of Isaiah was a unity, meaning the pocket gospel was in the original. But he did not say that the martyrdom was a unity with it. That he actually argues the contrary. He agrees with the mainstream consensus that the martyrdom was written later by a different author in a different generation. So there's another point in the interview where Litwa will reference the fact that there's a line or two in the martyrdom that clearly refers to the pocket gospel and the ascension. And that's true. So I think he has this false idea that because Norelli argued that the martyrdom and the ascension were a unity, that therefore the reference to Mary and the baby and all that stuff in the martyrdom counts as still being a reference to the pocket gospel. But the thing is that the martyrdom doesn't exist in the Slavonic and Latin, right? They have no knowledge of the martyrdom. So you can't refer to the martyrdom as telling you information about the Slavonic or Latin tradition of the ascension. This makes no sense. So he's completely garbled all the facts. He's gotten everything wrong. And remember, I said misinformation. This is massive amounts of misinformation here. But the bottom line is, no, the Slavonic and Latin do not have any mention of David, Mary, the baby, or any of that stuff. None of it's, not at all. They have no reference to the martyrdom text. They have no reference to these things. They're not in there. The pocket gospel is not shortened. It's completely removed. It's gone. Or one might argue it was never there to begin with. Something else was there. That's my position. But anyway, and that a single sentence sort of summarizing Jesus' sojourn on earth that doesn't match anything else in the text has been substituted instead. And so he's completely, now one can come up with all kinds of different theories to explain this, including the one he wants to be true. But you can't defend that theory with this false claim about, the shortened text in the Slavonic and Latin still mentions Mary and the baby and stuff. That is 100% false, and no one who knew what they're talking about could say this, which tells me he hasn't read Norelli, he hasn't read any of the literature on this, he hasn't read any of the texts, he's not read a Latin translation of the Latin, he's not read a translation of the Slavonic, he doesn't know what he's talking about at all, and he also doesn't read my book where I actually talk about all of this stuff, so he would know all of this stuff if he'd actually read things instead of just make shit up from the armchair based on weird telephone gamed apologetics on Reddit or wherever he's getting these ideas.
Yeah, wouldn't it technically be a bit ironic for M. David Litwa to start off by saying, there's a lot of misinformation running amok, and then spend the next 10 or 15 minutes doing nothing but spreading misinformation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what's happening here. And it really annoys me as a scholar myself. So
I can only imagine.
Even if, and there's no reason to, but even if you decide that you don't like chapter 11 as data, okay, you just want to kick it out of the book.
Briefly pause here. I just want to,
Isaiah,
since we need to correct misinformation, he's giving the impression of the audience that we're talking about the entire chapter 11. That's not true. It's a big chunk of chapter 11. Now, again, I think he's just being lazy and sloppy in his wording, but I don't want people to be misled. We're not claiming the entire chapter 11 was an interpolation. There's an interpolation in chapter 11. That's the actual position, but you can continue.
Yeah. And he also, at the very beginning, throughout the interview, he kind of references people that disagree with him on this, mainly being mythicists, as just discarding data. Discarding information without good
that's
reason.
A good catch. Yeah. He's discarding data. Right. He's discarding the entire scholarly history, all the literature, all the expert peer-reviewed literature on the Ascension of Isaiah. He's discarding all of it. Talk about discarding data. Yeah.
Of the Ascension of Isaiah. You can go and to an earlier section of the book, okay, which is back in chapter 3.
He's confused the martyrdom with the Ascension, and he doesn't know that the Latin and Slavonic don't have the martyrdom and thus don't have this passage that he's talking about right now. But
right, and then earlier, if I'm correct, he was saying that those particular versions of this have all of it, but they really don't. He said the Slavonic and
right. I mean, his wording is atrociously bad. So we've caught him multiple times where we've had to be very charitable to get his wording to not be a flat out lie. So he's really bad at phrasing things. So I'm willing to suspect that he's just wording things poorly. And so I want to keep trying to be as charitable as possible to what he might mean. So right. I don't think, anyway, so I can only criticize what I can be absolutely certain he means. Anyway.
My lovely wife, KC, said that's very kind of you.
I'm going to be less kind, and I'm going to write a blog up about this, and I'll reference and link to this video, but I'm going to be somewhat more unkind about it because I do really, I'm being jovial. I think what he's doing here is really unethical, honestly. This is professional misconduct in the worst way, because he's purporting to be an expert, to have researched all this stuff and to know what he's talking about. So he's misrepresenting himself to the audience as someone who knows what he's doing. But he has to know that he is not. He has to know that he hasn't read any of this stuff. Because if he had read it, he wouldn't be making these arguments, right? He wouldn't be making all these mistakes. So he knows he hasn't done any research on this. He hasn't read any of the manuscripts. He hasn't read any of the texts. He hasn't read Norelli. He hasn't read me. He hasn't read Knib. He hasn't read Knight. So he knows he hasn't done the research. So why is he purporting to have done so? That to me is very dishonest. And I think, like I said, it's unethical. I don't think a scholar should ever do this. I think if a scholar hasn't done the research, they should say, hey, there's a lot of literature on this. I am not up on it, right? Or I can't address Richard Carrier's argument because I haven't actually read it. I don't know what he argues in the book. Like a scholar would preface things that way and say, well, then I can talk about what I know, but I'm not going to pretend to know things that I don't. And worse, make stuff up. Now, maybe he's not making it up. Maybe these are things he heard somewhere. I don't know. But they're false anyway, right? And he didn't check. So he didn't act like a scholar. He acted like some sort of rando on the internet who just believed a bunch of garbled apologetics and pretends that it's scholarship. And I expect that from an amateur. I don't expect it from a PhD. It's really vexing to me.
Yeah, honestly, in this the entire interview, the thing that really kind of grated on me the most was him acting like people just discard data because we don't like it.
Yeah, that's very offensive, right? That's actually disrespectful. It's unprofessional, right? So his opponents have made let's put it this way, they have made arguments based on evidence that meet the standards of the field. It's past peer review. For you to say that it doesn't even fucking exist and that therefore there's no argument to make, they're just making stuff up. They're just dismissing things. They have no evidence or argument for it. That's disrespecting us, and it's being very unprofessional as a scholar. And so that pisses me off, frankly, right? So there's no PhD has no business acting like this. And so I have a big problem with this. Anyway, I got to calm down. So
okay.
let's proceed.
Well, you got to calm down. So let's listen to some more.
Yeah, I'm out of whiskey. I don't have any whiskey with me. So
damn. Yeah, Casey said, come visit. We got whiskey.
Yeah, I think a bottle of whiskey would be cheaper than a flight to the other side of the country. But not that I wouldn't love to go. I just couldn't afford it.
Hey, at least out there in California, you can DoorDash alcohol to yourself. We can't even do that here now.
Not where I am.
Not where you are. Okay.
I live up in the mountains. I'm deep rural. So we don't have those kinds of amenities. But yes, in California in general, yeah.
And you can have, again, a section on the birth, mentioning the birth of Jesus and the crucifixion. Okay. So it's not as if you were to get rid of chapter 11, that all of a sudden the Ascension of Isaiah would just be about, Jesus descending into the region of the moon and being crucified in the sky by sky demons. Okay, that's just misinformation. Okay.
Everything he just said is misinformation, not the other way around. 2 points. I mean, we've belabored the 1 point enough already, but I'll just reiterate. He's wrong. He's confusing the martyrdom with the ascension. So when he says, even if you remove chapter 11, you still have chapter 3. No, you don't. Chapter 3 is not in the Slavonic or the Latin. And even Norelli agrees it was never in the original ascension. Right. So the Ascension of Isaiah starts at chapter 6. The original text starts at chapter 6. So chapter 3 is irrelevant. Can't make this argument. I'm shocked that he doesn't know this, because this is rudimentary Ascension of Isaiah knowledge, right? Like if you study the Ascension of Isaiah at all, you've got to know this. Of all things, you've got to know this fact. You don't even have to have read Norelli to know this fact, because it's throughout the mainstream literature on this. So that's one thing. The other thing is where he kind of mockingly says, being crucified in the sky by sky demons into the region of the moon and all that. That's actually explicitly in the text. So it says the demons are in the sky, right? Explicitly. And there's demons battling there, and Satan is there. And it pretty much says that they are the ones who crucified Jesus. And there's a lot of other markers. People can look at my book where I go through the analysis of the text, where the description section where God or the angels describe what Isaiah is going to see doesn't mention earth or humans. It basically just says Jesus is going to descend to the air and demons and Satan are going to crucify him. That's basically what it says. Like you would have to, the only way you could get it to say something else is to import things into the text that aren't there. And that's why they desperately need the pocket gospel to be authentic. They need it to be in the original, because without that, well, the text does just say that Jesus comes down to the air and gets crucified by demons in the sky. That's what the text says. And so that's why they desperately need that pocket gospel. And that's why they're panicking about the fact that the scholarship prior to us had given strong arguments that the pocket gospel is an interpolation. That was never a problem before. But now that we've drawn out the implications of it, now it's a problem. Now it's all hands on deck. We've got to like destroy all mainstream scholarship now because we can't have this conclusion fly. And so but for him to like mockingly talk about it, like as if that's something we're making up. No, that is in the text. His only argument against it is the pocket gospel, and that's what we're talking about as to why that's not good evidence. But anyway, so those are the 2 points on that. But he's just misinforming the public. It's just so much. He just doesn't know what our arguments are, and that's the thing.
Yeah, that's really aggravating, because I've encountered it a lot, and the fact that there are PhDs that are doing it, it's causing it to trickle down into the more, I guess, amateur, like my level, I guess.
That's why I think it's a professional ethical responsibility to not act like this. I think if you want to be tendered the respect due you for having earned a PhD, then you have the responsibility to act ethically like a PhD. And that means what does the PhD give us that the average person doesn't have? It gives us the skills and background knowledge we need to research these things before spouting off about them. So like a random internet amateur will just like cruise some internet sites and then come to conclusions. They'll do their own research, right? But a PhD, they know how to actually properly research something, like for real. And they know that you have to do that before you declare things with confidence. Like those are if there's nothing else you learn getting a PhD, it's those 2 things, right? And he's abandoning both those things here. So he's tossing the very things that having a PhD gives him that would earn respect and our attention. He's ditching them and acting like some internet rando who's a high school dropout, right? Like this kind of behavior is wrong, and it really does harm the field, because if PhDs start acting like this, PhD doesn't mean anything anymore, right? Like why tender respect to a PhD if they're just going to do this rando shit? It's armchair making stuff up and disinforming the public and not doing research and making confident assertions about things you don't know anything about. That shouldn't be doing this, and it disappoints me. He's really devaluing my PhD, because he's devaluing all PhDs by acting like this, and I just wish he wouldn't. He doesn't have to. That's the thing. It's like he has a PhD. He knows how to do this properly. He totally could do it properly. Why is he not doing it properly? I don't understand, right? Like, as for an amateur, I can understand maybe they don't grasp the significance of the things that are beaten into in a PhD program. But Litwa should know these things. And so why he's abandoning them here, I don't know.
Maybe there should be like an HOA for PhDs. They make sure that you're.
Oh my God, that is pretty funny. Yeah. Some sort of, well, it's funny that technically, like, there are professional societies, but that's the one thing they don't do, is that they don't police responsibility among PhDs.
Yeah,
because it's a prestige economy. It's not an epistemic economy. This is a problem with academics in general. But that's a whole other soapbox.
Yeah. Heather Brown wants to point out, oh my God, sky demons, that's in the graphic novel.
Yeah, that would be in it. Yep, absolutely. Because Isaiah sees them when the angel takes him up. He sees the demons at war with each other, and Satan's there and stuff. And he has this conversation with the angel about it, and the angel explains why that's there. And then they keep going up to the levels of heaven. Right. But then, Jesus descends to the realm of the demons, and it talks about what they call the angels of the air, which is another way of talking about demons. The ancient demonology is complex and didn't always use the terminology with meticulous consistency, but because demon is a very vague term. It actually just means divinity. It literally is the Greek word for divinity. So it means God. It means minor God, really. But it has taken on an anachronistic meaning now and because they're monotheists, all minor gods had to be demons, because, right, if they're calling themselves gods, they got to be demons. And so the pejorative, the divinity became a pejorative, and it became the word what we now call demon. But in ancient Jewish angelology, there were actually two kinds of what we would mean by demon. There were the fallen angels, there were a bunch of them, a whole legion of angels. So thousands of angels joined Satan in the war, and then they all got kicked down into the air below the moon. The text of Isaiah, the Ascension of Isaiah, does not mention the moon, but we know from cosmology that talks about the firmament and the multiple levels of heaven, the moon is the border between the firmament and the first heaven. So we know that we know that's in Jewish cosmology, and that's the cosmology that the Ascension is referring to. So that's where the moon bit comes from.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, early Jewish cosmology at this time had the atmosphere extending all the way to the moon.
Yeah. There were this is, and this will come up. We'll talk about this a little bit more when he makes another point later. But there were disagreements about cosmology. So there were scientists who had calculated that what we mean by the atmosphere is only about 40 miles. But those scientists were not popular with religious people. Like this has always been the case. Religious people don't like the conclusions of scientists unless they can use those conclusions for their own favor. But the common popular belief and the Jewish belief and the biblical belief and all that is that the atmosphere goes all the way to the moon. But they did accept the scientific discovery that the moon is hundreds of thousands of miles away. So their conception of the relationship of the Earth to the moon is that there's this massive atmosphere that's many, many times larger than the Earth itself, and that it ends at the moon. And then beyond that, there's the ether, which is a whole other atmosphere of a whole other spiritual special substance. And so the whole universe is filled with some form of air, but it's not called air. They call it the air is the sublunar stuff, ether is the superlunar stuff. But anyway, that's basic. That's the common religious cosmology. I think I've not seen any religious text that accepts the divergent cosmologies. They all agree with this particular version of the cosmology, which is more in line with Plato and the original Aristotelian writings. But that a lot of that had changed scientifically by the time these books are being written. But science is not popular with these authors. They're sticking with traditional cosmologies by this point. But I was going to say about demons. So there's two kinds of demons, and this text doesn't distinguish between them. But there's the fallen angels, and then they, according to Genesis 6, had sex with earth women and had the Nephilim. They bore the Nephilim. By this time, those were interpreted as demons. So they're basically the progeny of fallen angels are demons, and they have similar magical powers and stuff, and they fly in the air and all of that stuff. But you could just say demon and mean both groups together. But when you said angel, you meant specifically the fallen angels, not their progeny. And so the Ascension of Isaiah switches between these terms here and there. But anyway, that's just filling in background stuff.